Before we go into this video, I just want to tell you guys that this is all recorded in English because the visa officer was an English native. And also you guys need to watch the video all the way to the end because this is not about the process of visa. This is about how to ace your visa interview with the visa officer that are in the embassy, right? So you need to watch each and every second of this video all the way till the end to get as much information as possible. And it doesn't matter what category you're looking for. This is important information that will reflect in your future visa interview, okay? And before you guys watch the interview, you can do me a huge favor by subscribing to my channel. Thank you. Here it is.
So you were an ex-visa officer, like you would do interviews in that, the horrifying place that people don't like, where you're sitting across the, what do you call that? The booth?
The
Not mirror, the
window.
glass. The window, yeah. Before we start, how long have you been doing and when did you left that job?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we can start our interview talking a little bit like kind of what is a visa officer, like why does one choose to become one? And I can give a
Funny
little
enough,
context
somebody
there.
somebody asked me how to apply for a visa officer.
So I was with the State Department for nearly 15 years.
And
Yeah,
where were
for
you
you can
stationed at?
Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Iraq, France, and in Washington, D.C.
So never Pakistan or India, huh?
No, but I've worked in both Pakistan and so you're stationed, but then like so for example in Sri Lanka we were the backup to Chennai. So I did do visa interviews and fraud investigations in Chennai, the consulate there. And I also did do consular training in Islamabad.
Okay, yeah,
Mhm.
that's where I got my visa. And do you speak multiple languages?
In theory.
In
I don't
theory?
do consultate, I only do consultations in English.
Okay, so that's good to know. So we know that you have accepted and rejected many visas. How dare you?
Thousands, you can say thousands.
Rejections or
You-
acceptance?
Well, just I've
Damn, how
conducted
dare you?
thousands of interviews.
You're such a nice person. I don't know why people are scared of you, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly kind of what the consultation is for, is to demystify.
The people in the behind the window. Okay, so let's start with some of my questions that I have. So basically,
Mhm.
first I'm gonna start with basic visa questions, which kind of includes every visa, and then we can go into like the subcategories B1, B2, F1, and stuff like that, right? So somebody asked, and these are questions from people. So they asked, do certain names matter when going for a visa?
They don't matter in terms of whether or not you qualify for a visa. They do matter in the sense that some names, if they're really common, could result in a delay in processing. So, for example, if there are security concerns about certain individuals with a name that's similar to a visa applicant's name, then yeah, that could result. Is that what you mean? Like,
Yeah, that. And then sometimes, some people have names that are linked with a person or in the past that had criminal activities, let's say, right? Or certain religious names. Let's say you have a name, Muhammad or Osama or something, and they're like, oh, maybe that's why they slowed down your visa processing or whatever. So I
mhm.
wanted to know, does that
Yeah,
affect?
yeah, no, so in that sense, yes, your name can matter. So what your name is doesn't determine if you're qualified for the visa or not. Only kind of what you say in your visa interview will be the ultimate determination of whether or not you're qualified for a visa. But yes, it's true. People with common names, and it has nothing to do with religion or ethnicity, but people with a common name are more likely to experience processing delays because the US government, of course, takes national security very seriously. And so if
Yeah.
somebody with a similar name to yours is of grave concern to the US government, they're going to take the extra time to make sure that you are not that individual if you have a similar name.
Yeah, and I think that happens in TSA checkups too. So when you're going on a flight, sometimes they will randomly stop you that your name is like of concern, and then they do an extra security check. It happened to someone I know, and they just stopped him before boarding the flight because your name was of a security concern, but then they left him alone because
I can't speak to TSA because that's a totally different federal agency, but it wouldn't surprise me if you have a common name, then there is going to be additional
so your
scrutiny.
suggestion is if people are having babies now, they should name them totally different or something pretty new that they haven't heard of.
I mean,
Moving on to question number two, administrative processing or AP, right? Why do some people get it and how can you avoid it? And why does it take so much time to get processed for some people.
Yeah, well, we just spoke of one reason why people sometimes get administrative
Okay, that's
processing,
one of
and
the, yeah,
that's
yeah.
their name, right? But what administrative processing really means is the officer's not ready to make a decision in your case. So it's a really useful tool for visa officers if they just aren't ready to say yes yet, to say, okay, you're refused for administrative processing, which means that it could mean anything. Right? It could be that I just want to see some additional documents. It could be that your name is similar to the name of somebody else that we
Mhm.
have concerns about. It could be because your area of expertise or something you're highly skilled in is something that is of concern or could be weaponized, and we want to do some double checking there. Could be that I'm not
Mhm.
quite sure what the law is, and I'm not sure if you qualify for the visa or not. And so I need to go back to Washington for some additional advice. Could be that I think that there's fraud in this case and we're going to investigate. So, when you're refused for administrative processing, it's really difficult as an applicant to know why you were refused. I
But then as an interviewer, you do know the reason, right? I mean, at
absolutely,
that point.
absolutely, yes.
So why don't they tell that? Because you said it could be any reason, but at that
Mhm.
point, they just hand them a slip. I don't know what color slip is going on right now, but usually they just hand them and there's like a denial. I don't know what's the number for it, 221.
221G.
221G, yeah. And why is that? Why can't they not say that this is the reason that we're putting you in administrative processing or rejecting your visa? Because, I mean, you do know the reason, right? You do know that, I don't know, your name, or we don't see that you're skilled enough. I mean, it could give a person a hint to better prepare for next time. So why is that? Is it orders from above?
I mean, there's multiple reasons why the 221G administrative processing is kept opaque. You're right. Like we don't share the reason why somebody is refused for 221G administrative processing oftentimes. Sometimes we do if it's as simple as, oh, hey, you need to come back with your medical exam before I can issue your visa. Like, you'll get a
Okay.
slip of paper saying refused for administrative processing. Please bring back, your police certificate or your medical clearance. And so it's not that we never say why people are under administrative processing, but oftentimes the reasons are highly classified. So we're not going to share that information. Another reason is because officers are under pressure to make, 100, 150 decisions a day sometimes. And so they don't have time to argue with applicants. And if you tell an applicant why they're refused, the immediate instinct will be to argue or to push back. And officers just don't have time to do that.
So basically
So
it's more of a time than anything else because you guys are backlogged and you guys are like, oh, person will start arguing over there. I don't think though that they will argue if you can say this is the reason. And then if they start arguing like, sorry, we have to take the next person or whatever, I think they will
yeah,
comply, don't you think? Or are there
no.
cases where, no?
I respectfully disagree. People argue all the time at the window, even when you don't tell them the reason why they're refused. And like I said, time isn't the only reason. Oftentimes, the reason why somebody is being put into administrative processing is classified or will become classified if an investigation is going to be opened on somebody. Time efficiency, processing efficiency is one of several reasons why that process is kept opaque.
Do you think that you guys are being monitored and that's why you're like, we cannot, tell them or whatever, you're monitored from higher up, so there are orders from higher up too, but or is it just that you are totally trying to avoid the argue back in that case?
Consular officers are trained
Oh,
before they go
okay,
into the
okay.
field, right? Like we have our processes, we have our regulations and rules that we followed. I mean, the disclosure of classified information, for example, would result in firing or worse, maybe even criminal
Oh, I see.
charges. So yeah,
Okay,
consular
okay,
these
okay, okay.
officers take their responsibility.
And then do you have certain quota for each visa that you have to give, or is it just like, whoever qualifies, qualifies?
Yeah. No, this is a common myth that I can bust. This is not classified. There is no quota. There's no quota. Officers make decisions based on how they feel about that applicant in terms of whether or not that applicant is being truthful, whether or not they're going to use their visas for the purposes that it's intended for, whether they're going to follow the rules of the visa. And they get a lot of training about how to ascertain those things before they begin visa interviewing. But there are no quotas. There's nothing that says like, oh, you need to refuse 30% of the people you interview. That just does not exist.
But then why, when people from America, right, they're applying H-1B visas from their job, they say that there are a certain number, like a lot of lawyers, they would say that there are a certain number of applications that have to be accepted, and there's like limited spots for that. That's why we do the
Mhm.
lottery thing, right?
Yeah, sorry.
So,
Those are two different processes. So I'm sorry. I assumed your question was about the visa officer at the visa window. Do they have a quota in terms of the number of people they have to
well,
approve or
that was
refuse?
towards you,
This,
but then I'm just
yeah,
bringing another
this is a
case that I
common
thought
myth.
was,
But in terms of, you're right. I mean, there are definitely caps. There's caps for the diversity lottery program. There's caps for the
Mhm.
H-1B program. There's caps for, I think, almost all the work visas. And those are set not by visa officers, but by Congress domestically.
But then
So,
if it's set by the Congress, then automatically doesn't it comes to you guys that, oh, you have to accept a certain number of candidates and reject a certain number of candidates, right?
no, no, because like, for example, using the H-1B example, it's USCIS that's responsible for doing the H-1B lottery and then approving petitions. So the
Hmm.
cap is addressed domestically. Once an applicant is in front of us doing a visa interview, our job is to make sure that they're qualified for the visa in the sense that they're being truthful, that they're credible, that they're going to use their visa correctly. We don't ask like, oh, what number, in the H-1B lottery do you have? Like our job, we don't monitor that. So, I mean, the U.S. immigration system is a patchwork, I would say, that involves a lot of different federal agencies, and different agencies have different responsibilities. The State
Yeah.
Department's responsibility is the issuance of the visa that allows you to then travel to the United States. In terms of administering like the H-1B program, that would fall under USCIS, which is the Department of Homeland Security, totally different federal agency.
Different. But let's say you get a hypothetical situation where you get 100 applicants in one day and all of them were truthful, God honest, and they were 100% qualified for what they came for. Would you
Then you would
accept all of
approve
them?
100 people. Yeah. There are good days and there are bad days.
Okay, but then won't like the higher ups be like, oh, wouldn't they be like, you didn't see any rejections or you didn't see anyone underqualified because you accepted 100? Like, wouldn't they argue, not argue, but question you basically about that?
There
Or
might be questions asked if you consistently are an outlier, different from all of your colleagues. So let's say on average, your colleagues are refusing 30% and you're approving
yeah,
100%,
that's
or
what I'm
you're
saying. Yeah.
refusing 90%, then sure, that, then a supervisor would ask. And supervisors do set a tone. I'm not going to lie, in the section, you have some people who are more positive, some who are more cynical.
Yeah.
So a culture can develop in a section, which is why sometimes embassies and consulates develop different reputations. However, to address that, the State Department insists that consular officers rotate every 2 or 3 years, and that includes their supervisors. And so, if you have a supervisor that is creating a certain kind of culture, chances are really good that they're going to be moving on in the next year or two. And so, what might be true for a friend when they were applying, in Islamabad may not be true when you go in and apply for your visa. So I'd be very
Because it's a
careful.
different person.
It's a different person, it's a different culture, and it's a kaleidoscope, right? The people are
Hmm.
constantly changing in and out, especially in Islamabad where the tours are only 1 year long. So I'd be very careful about making decisions based on anecdotes that you hear that, oh, it's easier in Karachi or it's easier than Islamabad. I mean, maybe it was
Yeah, I was gonna
yesterday, but
ask
it
about
can
that later, but
change.
yeah.
It can
Yeah, I was
change.
gonna, or maybe we can go in right now because some of the people they say that, in Karachi, so they're doing in Karachi right now, right? And they're like, oh, in Karachi, there's a better approval rate or something going on. But then you said it could change. Let's say a person travels is a Pakistani or an Indian, right? And they travel to Dubai or some other country, maybe Germany, and they're applying the US visa from there. Does that make their chances any better now because they got multiple stamps, let's say, for example? Or just that they're doing the visa interview from another country?
That's really dependent on a specific situation. It's hard to like kind of give a general rule when it comes to applying outside of your home country. If there is a general rule, it's that you should apply in your own home country, because somebody serving in Pakistan, for example, is going to be more comfortable issuing a Pakistani than somebody sat in Italy, especially if you've already been refused in Pakistan and then you go and apply in Italy. The officer is going to say, well, I don't really know anything about Pakistan, but I know those officers sat in Pakistan do, and they refused you, so I'm going to refuse you. That would be like just the natural way of thinking, barring, some really kind of special explanation about why a mistake was made in Pakistan and why you're showing up in Italy today.
So
On the
you're
other
saying
hand,
that, yeah, go ahead.
if you're somebody who is, living and working in the UAE for the last 20 years and you have an excellent job there and your family's there, then it makes sense to apply in the UAE, even if you're of
I see.
Pakistani nationality. So it really is situation dependent, I would say.
Oh, I see. So what you're saying is if you're hopping from one place to the other, expecting that you're going to get a same treatment as a resident in that area, right? Like, for example, Italy, if you're applying there, and then you're just there for like a month or two and doing that, it wouldn't give you precedence over the people who have been staying there for a long time. So it's better for you to apply from your own country where you were a resident, even if you're doing it again.
What I'm saying is sometimes people think that if they apply in a different country, that they have a better chance than if they apply in their home country where they were already refused. And usually that is not the case.
And another question I have for you is, does the language matter what they choose, or is it dependent upon the category? Let's say I'm very good at speaking Urdu, but I'm also very good at speaking English. So does it matter? Like, does it give you any bonus points or brownie points? I don't know.
Generally, it's best to conduct your interview in English if you can, because the frustration level for the officer is, going to be lower when they're able to communicate in their native language. There's also less chance of miscommunication because your Urdu may be excellent, but it doesn't mean the officer's Urdu is excellent.
Yeah, and if they start
And
speaking in old Urdu,
yeah,
that will be
well, I mean,
terrible. Yeah.
we're taught by older individuals, and so oftentimes the language that we learn isn't the most modern, youngest version of that language.
Yeah.
I learned that lesson the hard way. My first tour in Indonesia, my friends, after I knew them for a while, told me that I talk like an old man, and I was like, well, that makes sense
Yeah.
because I learned my Bahasa from an old man. But if you can avoid working through an interpreter, if you can communicate well in English, then that would probably be the way to go.
Well, some people have this, if we choose English, that would mean we're trying to impress the visa officer, with speaking their language and making our chances better for the US visa. Does that ever cross your mind or no?
No, I mean, if you really have questions about it, if you really do speak both languages equally well, you could, when you walk up to the window, say, "Hey, I speak both English and Urdu. What's your preference?" And then, or just follow the
Oh, they can
officer's
do it?
lead. Sure.
Okay. Usually, they say that until an officer hasn't asked you anything, you kind of shut your mouth and don't say anything because that also shows that you're trying hard.
Yeah, I mean, how you communicate is definitely a big part of the visa interview. If you come up to the
Mm,
window and you're so nervous and the officer's not even ready to speak with you yet, and you're already saying, "Hello, good morning, officer. Would you like to speak in Urdu or English?" You're right. That does set
yeah.
a first impression that maybe, you're a little bit desperate to make a good impression when, your purpose of travel is, a simple trip to Disneyland, for example. So, I mean, your attitude attitude at the visa window really should match, what you're telling the officer in terms of your motivations. If you are going for vacation and you're sweating bullets and you're tripping over your own words because you're so nervous, yeah, that's going to raise red flags for the officer, because there shouldn't be that much on the line. There's other Disneylands in the world, not just the US one. It's not something worth being so nervous about. So if you're communicating in a way that doesn't make sense for the trip, then the officer starts to suspect, is there more on the line here than just a vacation? Is it because if I issue this visa, it's a whole new life for the applicant in the US, a world of economic opportunities that they've lined up for themselves that's actually on the line rather than a vacation. But that's the
Mm,
whole point of, what we do at Argo Visa is we understand kind of, okay, what is your actual purpose of travel? What is it that you want to do? How do we communicate this in a way to the visa officer that makes sense and that they'll find believable? And so developing a strategy based on actual intentions and actual plans is usually step number one.
And before we go any further, I forgot to mention that I am basically partnering up with Argo Visa, and their agency helps book consultations for students or for people who have their interviews coming up. So basically, you guys do like mock interviews for people who have a visa appointment coming up, right? And to access that, I have a link down below. You can use my link down, and you can book a consultation through that link with and can you choose your visa officer, or it could be random, like whatever they get.
We match. So we look at what your purpose of travel is. Actually, what we look at is your category of visa that you're applying for, where you're applying from, if you have previous refusals, how complicated your case is, what it looks like you need the most. And then we match you with the consultant that's best suited to help you, because we have quite a few consultants. They're all former visa officers. Between us, we have experience in all the visa categories from all over the world. If you're a Filipino applying for a tourist visa to go to Disneyland, you're going to get a different consultant than if you're French
Oh,
and you're
I
applying
see.
for an E2 visa, right? So it depends. So we try to match you up with the person that knows most
Okay.
about your visa category, to talk to you about, okay, this is how visa officers are going to be looking at you in your situation. This is how they're going to be
Hmm.
applying what they see as the qualifications for the visa. This is what we think is the best strategy for you going into your visa. Okay, now let's practice. And then we do some mock interviews if you book the 45-minute or the 60-minute. There isn't time in 30-minute to talk about your situation, explain all the qualifications, and still do a mock interview. So the 30-minute consultation is great for people who just maybe you've had a visa interview before and just have a simple question or two. But the 45-minute and the 60-minute is really designed to give people the full explanation and to allow them to practice. And then they get feedback on, how they're sounding. So in the example you brought up before, if they're being overly aggressive or they're seeming more nervous than they should be for their intended purpose of travel, we'll tell them, we'll say, hey, this isn't really working. This doesn't come across
Hmm.
quite well. Let's try doing this instead. Okay. And then we can practice again.
You talk about that for 45 minutes. Maybe they'll talk about like your priorities or what you're applying for, your background, and then we can do a mock interview you said for 10, 15 minutes. But you know what's always surprising to hear? Well, not surprising, but what I usually hear and gone through is that the visa interview, it doesn't even last 30 seconds for some people, and for some people it's maybe 2 minutes. So can you guys really
That
judge
is true.
based on verbal responses in that 2 minute span? Like, is it pre-decided? Well, pre-decided we can talk about, or we can talk about in this question. Or do you guys already know before the person walks in, you look at their documents, you're like, okay, this case looks good, and whatever talking he does, it wouldn't matter
Uh,
as much.
Okay, so to answer the first question, nothing is pre-decided. So it's not like the night before we're going through the applications and we're like, oh, this guy has a certain name, we're putting him in the refused pile. Okay, that we don't do that. We literally scan the DS-160 as the person's walking up to the window. So as you're walking up to the
Okay.
window, I'm looking at my computer and I'm literally looking at your application for the first time. Okay, so it's not
Hmm.
pre-decided in that sense. There are outliers though. So if somebody has been issued 10 US visas before, they've always used their visas correctly, they're walking up, they're looking confident and well
Yeah.
dressed. Yeah, I'm leaning towards yes before we've even started the conversation. So to the extent that judgments are quickly made, yes, they are quickly made, but nothing is pre-decided. There's no hard and fast rule. The fact of the matter is that most decisions for the B1, B2 in a place like Islamabad are made within 3 to 5 questions, which is why it's so important to have a strategy when you go into your visa interview. And essential to your strategy should be knowing what you want to say because you know what's going to make you sound qualified.
Yeah.
That's what we focus on in the consultations. Like sometimes people start a consultation, say, okay, tell me what to say. And so, well, I need to get to know you first. Like I need to know what your situation is so that I can point out to you, these are the things that you should be saying based on who you are and your situation.
Quick question before we go into the next one, which is what do you guys are typing on the screen? So, like, is it just to show, make them nervous or body language thing where you're like, somebody is talking about something and you're like, you're typing that and then like, is it just a scare tactic because,
No,
or you're
it's
making
it's
notes? What are you
it's not
doing?
meant to be a scare tactic. Most of the time when an officer is typing while they're talking to you, it's because they're writing down notes about what you're saying.
But why do you have to write notes if the decision's going to be made in 2 minutes or 30 seconds for some?
So
Well,
for
moment.
example, if you come up to the window and you tell me you want to go to Disneyland for 2 weeks with your family, you've got a good job in Pakistan, earning 50,000 US dollars a year. I'm typing those things into my notes, and then at the end, when I make my decision, I might type an additional sentence or two about my decision, and then I give my decision to you.
Oh,
That way, if you come back next week and apply again, the next visa officer knows what you said in your previous interview and why the officer made the decision that she made. They
oh,
could
I see, I
also be
see.
Googling you. They could also be chatting with the visa officer at the next window about when we're going for coffee. But there's nothing that the officer is writing that should be
That is so
making the
cruel.
applicant nervous.
There's a guy or a gal, their life is on the line for some, and you guys are talking about, yo, when are we getting Starbucks? I
Everybody
feel
needs coffee.
no, I get that. I get that. Or maybe you're talking about coffee when you're pretty sure about the candidate. You're like, yeah, whatever,
Yes.
this one's good. Yeah, let's get coffee. I see. So a better tip will be to bring you guys coffee. What if somebody does bring you guys coffee? That would be
Yeah, you're not
funny.
allowed to bring things in, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Somebody
I
tried to
know.
pass me a packet of M&Ms, which was sweet. I had to pass it back.
Oh, okay. But did you approve the person?
The biggest bribe I ever got. I honestly don't remember.
You remember, you're not telling us. Come on, you do.
Oh,
A little bit.
honestly don't remember.
I wish you did. But talking about dressing and personality, like does it help pass the interview? Well, obviously you're not gonna dress like garbage. You have to have a certain cleanliness to your clothes, but does it matter to what degree? What should be the style? Does it matter in a certain visa category? Let's say you're going for H1B, F1, B1, or is it same across the board? Like what would be the dressing? And let's talk about dressing and then personality.
So yeah, the way you dress matters. Like you said, rule number one is be hygienic, be clean, look neat, look put together. That's true for any visa category you're applying for. But I do think the standards vary based on what you're applying for. So if you're an 18-year-old applying for a student visa and you want to come in a t-shirt and jeans, I think that's totally fine as long as you're showing respect for the process. If you come in a tank top and shorts and it looks like you've just rolled out of bed, I mean, I think it's human
Mm.
nature to kind of, not appreciate that. But, if you're an 18-year-old applying for a student visa and you come in a three-piece suit and a tie, I guess that's where personality comes into play because then the officer has to ask themselves, like, oh, is this just, a really ambitious young person who's trying to make a good impression? Okay, I can forgive that. Or is there something more here? Is this person like incredibly in a incredibly desperate situation, just pulling all the stops to get their visa visa approved. So you want to dress appropriately for kind of your intended purpose of travel. You want to be neat. You want to be respectful of, the embassy and the officer that you're speaking to, and how you present yourself. But there isn't any kind of dress code. It's not like, if you wear a t-shirt, you're going to be refused. But, if you claim to be a businessman who's making millions of dollars and you come in, broken slippers and shorts, then I'm wondering if you really are the successful businessman you claim to be.
What if they're like they want to live the Zen lifestyle, be a little, simplistic in that regard?
That's why I say personality doesn't matter. There's not like any hard and fast rules. At the end of the day, these officers are human.
Yeah.
They're
No, I
trying to
get
make
that.
a judgment based on all the factors presented in front of them as quickly as possible.
No, I get that 100%. And what about the personality aspect? I was reading on this one Quora Reddit. There was a guy who was talking about that I got rejected 2 times for a visa because I was nice and I was really calm in my demeanor and everything. And then I got rejected. The lady was nice too, but still the lady rejected. The third time, I didn't even give a crap, right? I just went in, and when they were asking me questions, it felt like the vibe was that I don't even need this visa. I'm just doing it. It's whatever. And at that try, he actually got it. In that aspect, can you like explain a little bit?
It depends. Like I said, your attitude has to be appropriate for, kind of the visa that you're going for. We expect different communication styles from a 17-year-old applying for a student visa than we expect from our EB1 applicants that are supposed to be the best of the best, right? There's different
Yeah.
standards and expectations depending on the category of visa that you're talking about. Whether or not you get a visa is not dependent on if you're nice or not. Now, of course, you don't want to antagonize the visa officer, but it's not like, oh, he seems like a really nice guy, so I'm going to issue the visa. It's, do I think he's really going to do what he says he's going to do and follow, the guidelines for the visa? That's what the decision is based on. If you go in and you're confident in your answers and confident enough that you don't feel the need to be overly nice, then yeah, I think that can influence how an officer sees you and their decision.
Eye contact, maybe. Does that
Absolutely.
matter?
Absolutely. Eye contact matters. Even if the officer is typing on their computer, when they look up, you should be looking at them. You want to establish that rapport, that connection as much as you can, because it's not about being nice, it's about being credible and trustworthy.
I see, I
And
see.
so
But sometimes it's like you're typing on the screen and the guy is like gawking at you like this, and you're like, what the hell, doesn't it kind of get weird for you guys? Well,
Well,
they
don't.
want
Well,
to
eye
maintain the,
contact and
but
gawking are different things. Musa, you asked me about eye contact. No, you shouldn't go in and gawk.
no, so because they're nervous, right? And then you're like typing on the screen and the guy's like looking at this because they're nervous or whatever, or is it just normal? Like,
So I think the difficult thing about the visa interview is it feels like an interrogation because the officer is abrupt
exactly, yes.
and they're only asking a few questions, but yet the expectation on the part of the applicant is that they behave as if they're having a nice, normal conversation with a peer. And that is the goal.
And what if a certain person comes, right, and you're like, you didn't even ask for documents sometimes, and they slip the documents to the window. Do you guys appreciate that, or it kind of makes
No, we
you?
don't. It's actually a pet peeve of many officers.
Oh, actually, so
Yeah.
so you're saying that if a person is trying too hard to give everything without even asking, it kind of makes the officers mad. Sometimes they're like, I need your documents, right? And then they try to slide it through the window, but they're like, no, we don't want it through the window. We just want to see it from the far. But you haven't made that clear. So what should they do? What should be the best practice in that sense?
You know what? Sometimes you can't win, right? Like officers are oftentimes grouchy. And the reason why they're grouchy is because they're repeating the same, 15, 20 questions or sentences up to 100 times a day. So even people who are very nice and who started visa work with the best of intentions can
Hmm.
get burnt out, can get frustrated with repeating themselves all the time. You know, maybe they were nice for the first month, maybe they were even nice for the first year, but now, you know, they're a year and a half into it, and their day can be a little bit like Groundhog Day. You asked me what the decision and that guy who passed me the M&Ms is. I honestly can't remember because I make so many decisions a day, every day, day after day, day after day after day.
And you don't
So
remember the person at all.
you meet hundreds of people a week. Nobody
Yeah,
would,
okay.
Lisa. This
No,
isn't
yeah.
coldness on my part, but I think the
So
thing for people to know that's helpful is that it's not personal. So if an officer is rude, like, no, I didn't say put it through the window, I said show it to me. It's like, okay, just know that that officer is frustrated with their job, with their role, and they're
not with
probably
you.
they're not with you. So don't lose your confidence. Don't shrink into yourself and stop giving nice, full answers. It's unfair, but you should continue to be kind and open and confident in expressing yourself and your qualifications in that visa interview, regardless of the officer's attitude.
So let's say we are having an interview, right? So should I answer only what I've been asked for, or should I give any extra more details, right? Like I should never do that. I should only be very specific to my answers. Does that help the case?
It depends on if it's something that you want to talk about and you need the officer to know about you or not. Something that we really focus on in our consultations at Argo is what is it about you that are your strengths that qualify you for the visa? Okay. Once we've identified that, now let's talk about how to answer the questions or how to use the questions to let the officer know these things about you. So if
Okay.
you're a businessman who generates $1 million in revenue every year,
Mm-hmm.
and the officers asks you, what do? You don't say, I'm a businessman. You say, I'm a businessman in the plastics industry. We generate $1 million in revenue at my business, right? So really, you know, you want to give nice full answers, but you don't also just want to talk aggressively and take over the
But
interview.
does that mean a little extra? Like the officer would be like, I didn't ask how much you generate or whatever. Because, okay, on the application, it's written that he's a businessman, right? But you're asking, what do you do? So they'll be like, I'm the owner of this company and this is what the company does. Will that be better? Or they have to go into the revenue details too?
Remember, the officer's goal is to make a decision about whether or not you qualify as quickly as they can. So, as long as what you're saying is relevant to their decision, i.e., it is relevant to the qualifications of the visa, they probably want to hear it and they're not going to interrupt you.
I see, I see. And going forward with that, what's the policy nowadays for Pakistan, India, or maybe other Asian countries for the approval rate? I mean, we can go into the specific visa categories for approval, but what do you think the overall consensus is when it comes to like getting approved nowadays? Because it's getting pretty bad. I know you did say that I don't know about the ongoing executive orders from Trump, but what do you think is the direction we're heading to?
Well, to be clear, there isn't like any specific, like as we discussed before, there's no quotas and there's no specific policies according to country or region. So it's not like the US government says, we really need to, you know, reduce the number of student visas we're approving in India and increase the number of student visas that we're approving in Brazil, for example. Okay. Policies like that
Yeah,
are not made. There is a set of qualifications for the visa, and then it's up to the individual visa officers to determine if the person in front of them meets those qualifications and if they believe what that person is saying. Overall, refusal rates in general do seem to be increasing. It does seem to be getting harder and harder to demonstrate that you qualify for a visa.
yeah.
They do seem to be tightening a little bit, kind of their interpretation of the regulations. So, you know, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that there aren't such things as trends, but the trend is that refusals are going up in general, and that's why it's really important to be prepared for your visa interview, to know what your highlights are, to know what you want to say, to know which questions are the opportunity to use to say those things, because yeah, like you said, Musa, it's 30 seconds to make or break your case. And once you've been
Yeah,
refused, it's harder to get approved a second or a third time when you apply. Not impossible, but harder.
100%. And another thing I wanted to ask, somebody did ask, and it's a good question. If somebody in your family is rejected and you're applying for a visa, does that makes your rejection case stronger in a way, or like, oh, does that lower your chances for a visa approval if someone in your intermediate family, let's say, gets rejected?
I think it kind of depends on why they were rejected and who they are. So, for example, if you're the spouse
Sibling
of
or
a
spouse, yeah.
primary breadwinner and the primary breadwinner gets refused, then yeah, you're probably not going to be approved. On the other hand, just because your spouse gets refused doesn't mean that you don't have your own, qualifications that would compel an officer to make a different decision.
What
So
about
it's
siblings, parents?
like I said, it really depends. Like if you and your sibling are in a similar socioeconomic situation, so if you're like a 19-year-old and a 20-year-old and you're both living with your parents and you're both unemployed and one of them your sibling gets refused, you can probably extrapolate that you are likely to get refused as well. But, if you have a deadbeat brother out there and you're a successful doctor, it does,
Yeah.
because your brother was refused a visa, it doesn't mean that you're going to be refused a visa.
Okay, so it really depends on the situation of their lifestyle and economic situation, right?
For most category of visas,
For
I'm,
more,
I mean, I'm
okay.
kind of assuming like B1, B2.
So when you're doing background checks, whatever, like family records, so other than the DS-160 form, do you guys actually do the background check on a person, or is it later after the visa interview? Let's say a person has a criminal record in Pakistan, or the person doesn't. Does it like, do you guys know beforehand on the visa interview that, oh, we have, certain like websites or I don't know, certain information on this guy, and we have extrapolated from external sources. Do you guys have that information?
Yeah, when you go into your visa interview, you should assume that the visa officer knows everything in terms of your previous travel history to the US, any criminal activities, any derogatory information that's out there about you, previous visa applications, what your family is doing. The safest thing is just to assume the visa officer knows and to be truthful about it.
Okay. And then I wanted to talk about the bank statements, but we can go in when we go into B1 category. Yeah. Is there any specific time of the year that you should be applying for the visa, or a specific time in the day which is the best to get a good approval?
I mean, some people say if you get a morning appointment, that's great because the visa officers are a little fresher, whereas at the end of the
Yeah, you guys
day,
got your
they're
coffee.
tired. But you never know. At the end of the day, maybe I've just refused 10 people in a row, and psychologically, I'm looking to end on a good note. Like I don't think you can really predict these sorts of things. Time of year, though, I do think if you can avoid applying in the summer, because that tends to be the busiest time of year for visa officers, and it's also the time of year when visa officers are moving posts. So kind of staffing is low at a time when visa demand is high. So if you want to
Yeah.
travel in the summer, it is smart to apply as early as possible.
That's good information. If someone's applying a US visa without travel history, what are the chances look like nowadays, or before, what were the chances?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Are you that businessman generating $1 million in revenue, or are you the deadbeat
Okay,
brother?
I see, I see. So it really depends on a certain situation. Let's go into the specific visa category for now. So let's start with B1, B2. Okay, so with the B1, B2, what are the questions you guys ask?
Well, visa officer can ask you anything they want. There's no script. They can ask you what color your shoes are. They can ask you what kind of pets you have at home, right? But I can
No, but
almost
general
guarantee
questions.
you that the first question will be an open-ended question that is something along the lines of why are you traveling to the US? What's your purpose of travel? What brings you in today? Why are you applying for a visa? And that first question, that first open-ended question you get is really your best opportunity to demonstrate that you're qualified for the visa. And there's two qualifications that they're looking for in the B1, B2 interview, and that is that you have a credible purpose of travel and that you have strong ties to your home country that'll compel you to return. And so if you can, you want to address both of those in your first answer.
And how do you make them believe what's the best answer that you will come back again?
Well, it depends on why you're coming back, depends on your situation, right? So let's take the example of the businessman who, let's say he wants to take his family to Disney. So if they say, okay, what's your purpose of travel? Say, well, my purpose of travel is to go to Disneyland with my wife and my kids. We're going for 2 weeks. I have to be back no later than March 30th. However, because I run a plastics business that generates about $1 million in revenue, and I cannot not miss the board meeting on that date.
Okay. And do you guys, about the revenue thing, do you guys actually double check the bank statements?
They can double check. So you should always, I mean, you should always be honest in your visa interview is the bottom line. Like instead of, as an applicant, instead of wondering, can they check this? Do they know this? Just go in and know that you need to be honest. Because if you get caught in a lie, then those notes that we talked about earlier will reflect that. And you've just done yourself a great disservice in terms of ever being qualified for a visa in the future. It's better to be refused today because you don't quite meet the qualifications and stand a chance 5 years from now than it is to go in and say things that are not true. And now you've ruined any chances of you ever going to the US again.
That's a good answer. And any specific event we can use, such as weddings, events going on in America, or something that you've been invited to, like invitation cards. Should you bring that to your visa interview? Let's say I'm going for a wedding and I'm applying for a B1, B2. Is that a good case?
If you're going for a wedding, you can bring the invitation with you to your visa interview. It certainly doesn't help to feel prepared, but the goal of your visa answers should be to answer them specifically and concretely and confidently enough the officer doesn't feel the need to ask you for an invitation. You want to come
Okay.
across in a way that's credible so that the officer believes what you're saying and doesn't feel the need to look at documents, because you can print a wedding invitation at home to say anything you want. So that piece of paper holds very little value to the visa officer. They're looking at you, they're listening to you, and they're making their evaluation based on what you're saying to them and how you're saying it, not based on how beautiful the wedding invitation is.
And then you also said that you Google or use Facebook or whatever, right? So if they're saying that the
Oh,
certain
yeah.
person, we're going to a wedding of a certain person, you will start looking up that information, right? To see
They
if that
ab-
person is that.
they absolutely could. If they don't believe you, they probably won't. They'll just refuse you, right? They don't have the time to. If they suspect you're not telling the truth, they don't have the time to run it down. The path of least resistance is just to refuse you.
And then it really depends on how you make them believe when you're bold and you're like
Exactly.
to the point on the answer, then they really don't
Yeah.
have to check up on it. They're like, oh, we know that this person is talking the truth.
If you're credible, then the chances, if you're credible, they might double check. But I mean, if you're somebody who's been to the US many times before, if you've traveled all around the world, or if you're, very convincing about why this wedding matters to you and why you want to be there for it. I mean, these are the credible type of answers that an officer will more easily believe than if you show up and shove a wedding invitation through the window.
And then it doesn't matter if a person stutters in the middle, like them, like stuff like that, filler words, doesn't matter really if
I mean,
the point
only
is getting
only to
across.
only to the extent if it is interfering with your ability to come across as an honest, truth-telling person.
Okay.
Like we've already kind of discussed at length already about why it's
Yeah,
important
yeah,
to
yeah.
establish that you're credible and that you're not overly nervous. Officers know that everybody's a little bit nervous for their visa interview.
Yeah, yeah.
They expect that. So, you don't have to be nervous about being nervous as long as you have good intentions and you're going in and being honest.
Okay. And then let's move on to the F1, F2 because this was the most popular questions asked about it. What's the best preparation for it or the questions repeatedly asked?
So the three things that officers are looking for in a student visa applicant is, do I believe this person is really going to study in the US? Is that really their primary reason for going to the US? Do I believe that when they finish their studies, they're going to come back to their home country or at least leave the United States? And given those two things, does it all make financial sense?
What about
So the
college? Does that matter? Because
well,
some
I mean,
people choose community colleges, right?
to the extent that it goes to the first qualification, do I really believe this person's primary purpose of going to the US is to study? It does matter. So, if you could be going to a great university in your home country, but instead you're going to a community college in the US, you need to be able to explain why that makes sense. Because
I see.
because it goes to, are you a credible student, or do I think that this is all just a cover because you want to go to the US and work, or go to the US to be with your girlfriend or whatever the case may be.
And then does the major matter that what major you're going for, or it's more like the university and the acceptance in which university you're going for?
The major matters to the extent that it goes to the third qualification, which is, does this all make financial sense? If you're majoring in something that isn't going to get you a job in your home country, then I'm going to have a hard time believing that this makes financial sense for you to invest $100,000 in your career or in your education to major in something that doesn't apply in India, for example, or in Pakistan, for example. So you want to explain why you want to study in the US, what you're going to study, and how it all makes sense for somebody who actually is planning on returning home.
That makes sense. And do you know what's the approval ratio going on nowadays for this visa?
Don't know off the top of my head. I want to say 1 in 4 visa applicants get refused. I think it might be a bit of a higher refusal rate for students at the moment, but I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to check.
Yeah, because usually people are saying it's 3 and 4 that are getting refused. There's 90% rejection rate nowadays, but that's the word
That's
going on.
yeah, that's certainly not the case globally.
Okay, but to a certain countries it is.
I don't know, but that information is public. So if you go to the State Department website, they always publish the numbers from the previous years.
Okay, let's talk about some students that transfer their colleges, right? So if they have a certain college on their visa and they transfer it and then they come back, I know you are not, that was not your job to be in the immigration department, but do you know if they will have problems if they shift colleges back and then they travel to their country and come back?
It depends on why they're changing colleges. I think if you went to the US to go to Stanford and now you're going to a community college and you're back
Yeah.
for your visa interview, I think you better have some good explanation as to why you made that change. On the other hand, if you went from community college to Stanford, the officer is going to be happy for you and probably issue that visa.
So it really makes sense if you're downgrading or upgrading at the end of the day.
Well, it depends on your reasons. So let's say it's even a lateral move from one decent university to another decent university. If it's because like you discovered, oh, they have, this university in particular has, a great lab for the kind of research you want to do. I mean, all they want to know is that you're a credible student. So if you have
Okay.
academic motivations, then it doesn't matter to the officer if you transfer schools.
And what are the basic questions asked in this particular interview for F1? Well, you will ask about obviously what university you're going to, why you're going there, what you're majoring in, right? And then bank statement, who is funding? They usually ask that, right? Who is funding your education? So how important of an answer is that to you guys, and what's the best practice to answer that?
So the best practice is to interpret the question as not who's funding the education, but why does it make financial sense? So it's well, my father's paying, he's been saving up for my college education because he knows that this degree in IT is highly
Mhm.
sought after in Hyderabad, where I'm returning to. Right. So it's not about like who, but does it make sense? If it's an uncle that's paying, for example, that could work too, but then you need to explain why an uncle is willing to pay, let's say, $100,000 for your education when he's not an immediate family member. So I
And
have an
what
uncle
about
who's
self-funding?
yeah, sure. But then you have to, if you are using, kind of all the savings that you ever had after working for 10 years to go and get a master's, then you need to explain why it makes sense financially. So I'm
Yeah, because some
self-funded.
people do it later in their 30s and they're like, we want to go do masters because we worked in Pakistan or India, right? So they're self-funding. And is that bad? Like, does it reflect badly? Because why is he going now after all that time just to study, even though he had so much money he earned over there?
If you've kind of been working for a certain amount of time and now you're spending all of your savings so that you can go and do a master's in the US, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you explain how that's a smart investment in your longer term future. Why now is a good time in your career to take that academic break and how it's a good investment for your future career prospects. So again, always going back to, does it make sense? Does it make financial sense? Doesn't matter if you're paying or your uncle's paying or your dad's paying. Does it make sense for somebody who's going to do what he says he's going to do?
And then what about
Okay.
spouses, right? There's a lot of, I know there were 3 minutes, 2 minutes left, but quick. So what about the spouses? A lot of them get rejected. So what's the best case scenario where you can get a good approval rate for your spouse on F4? I think F1 is F4, right? Or F2 is it?
F2, yeah, F2.
F2, yeah, and then for B1, B2 there isn't one, but for H1B there's H2, H4 I think,
H4.
and then for F1 is F2. So like, what is the best practice for them to get approval if they're applying for a spouse?
So the primary qualification for the F2 is that you demonstrate that you're in a real marriage that's not for the purposes of, joining somebody in the United States. So that's job number one to establish in your visa interview, but also to explaining why it makes sense for you to join your spouse in the US if the both of you are indeed coming back. So it comes back to for whether you're applying for an F2 or an F1 or a B1, B2, the majority of your answer should focus on your ties, all the reasons why this is a temporary trip to the US because you have good reasons for returning home. That's
And
the
what if
primary.
they get married online, like on a Zoom call? Some people do like online. We call it in Islam, it's called nikah, which means like a ceremony that a person can do online through a priest, and they have certification for it, everything. Would you guys take that as a marriage and then
So
let the person, yeah.
whether or not a marriage is a legal marriage depends on the local law. So if in Pakistan, the Pakistani authority would view that as a legal marriage, then chances are the embassy there in Islamabad would see it as a legal marriage as well. They have this information on the website, like what kind of documentation per country is required to demonstrate a legal marriage. But a marriage being legal doesn't mean that it wasn't for the purposes of immigration. So it still needs to be established that the marriage is not for the purposes of getting that US visa.
I see, I see. Okay, let's end this interview with Lisa. And we are short on time. It was my mistake. I couldn't set up the technical things in time. But if you guys have any more questions, talking to the audience, if you guys have any more questions, you can definitely put it in the comments below, and maybe we can schedule another interview with I was gonna say Visa with Lisa. And basically we can talk more about it, since this was our first interview, so we had to break a little ice too, and get to know about Lisa as a person, right? And next time we will just completely focus on the visa category. And again, if you guys want to schedule an interview, a mock interview, and preparation tips from ex visa officers, then you can definitely check out Argo. The link is down below. You can use my link, and then with that, you can schedule an appointment with one of the visa officers. And it wouldn't be Lisa, it would just be whoever is best suited to your needs, to your visa category. With that, we're gonna end this call. Lisa, thank you so much for giving me extra time. And hopefully we can talk again. And still, I know there are gonna be so many questions that are gonna be lined up after this. So hopefully we have covered much of it, as much as possible.
It was my pleasure meeting you and speaking with you today. Thank you.
Come here, girl. Go, baby, go with it. Come to the